In the dazzling heart of Manhattan's elite, where glamour conceals darkness, one night of celebration took a deadly turn. Veronica Steele, a woman famed for her beauty and power, watched her world unravel with a single sip of champagne. Amid the luxurious penthouse views and clinking glasses, secrets poisoned the night, leaving one man lifeless and a city captivated by a twisted tale of love, obsession, and betrayal. Veronica, a woman who effortlessly captivated everyone around her, had built an empire in luxury fashion by the age of 45, each success enhancing her allure and command. But beneath her polished exterior lay a hidden obsession, a hunger for youth that led her to pursue men half her age. Her latest lover, Jake Holloway, was a 24-year-old artist with a rugged edge and undeniable talent. Veronica first saw Jake at an exclusive art event in a chic Manhattan loft. The crowd was buzzing, a blend of critics, curators, and the city's privilege drifting between abstract canvases and clinking champagne glasses. But Jake stood out. His worn leather jacket, tousled hair, and intense gaze marked him as someone who didn't quite belong. It was as though he'd brought the grit of the streets into this refined space, a rawness that Veronica found intoxicatingly different from the polished socialites who fawned over her. Jake's artwork was as captivating as his presence, bursting with emotion and defiance that refused to be tamed. A struggling artist scraping by on freelance commissions and small gallery shows, his talent was recognized, but his name was largely unknown. Jake wasn't looking to settle or compromise. He wanted his art to breathe on its own, untouched by the influence of the elite. Yet, the moment Veronica approached his piece, a brooding depiction of city life, he felt something shift. She stood there, transfixed, her gaze unwavering, as if she saw the chaos within him that even he kept buried. Drawn to her like a moth to a flame, Jake found himself intrigued by Veronica's commanding presence and the power she exuded. She was everything he wasn't: established, wealthy, and unshakable. Their connection was immediate, magnetic, and soon she was drawing him into her world, a place of indulgence and luxury he'd only glimpsed from afar. He convinced himself it was just a phase, a curiosity to be indulged briefly before returning to his roots. But Veronica's influence was unyielding, luring him further with each extravagant gesture until the lines between his ambitions and her desires began to blur. The intoxicating pull between them had spiraled into a whirlwind romance filled with exclusive parties, champagne, and art gallery escapades. For Jake, this world was thrilling yet suffocating, and over time, his desire to break free grew stronger. He wanted his art to be recognized for itself, untethered from her influence and wealth. To Veronica, his independence felt like a betrayal. She viewed Jake as a possession, yet a beautiful extension of her own vibrancy. The thought of him leaving her for another life, another woman, filled her with a growing sense of fear and jealousy. Though her life appeared flawless, Veronica was poised on the edge of something darker, willing to do anything to keep Jake's devotion bound to her alone. Veronica's obsession with Jake grew like ivy creeping up a wall, quietly but persistently embedding itself into her life until it threatened to consume everything. She could feel the pulse of it with each stolen glance, each time he laughed with someone else, each night she lay alone, imagining him slipping through her grasp. What had begun as a thrilling fling had now turned into something far darker, a sense of possession that tightened like a fist around her heart. Jake was no longer just her lover. He was a lifeline to the vitality she feared was slipping away with every passing year. Her world was carefully curated, her days filled with meetings and photo shoots, her evenings with glittering social gatherings. Jake, however, was different, a fresh burst of color in her otherwise monochrome existence. She showered him with gifts, each more extravagant than the last. Vintage watches, hand-painted Italian shoes, first-edition art books he could barely believe were real, all tokens of her affection, gestures she believed would tether him closer to her. But no matter how much she gave, Jake seemed to slip further away, increasingly restless, like a caged animal searching for escape. One evening, Veronica's patience broke. She attended one of his gallery shows, a small, gritty event where young artists mingled in a cramped studio space, raw and unfiltered. She observed Jake from a distance, watching him navigate the crowd with ease, laughing and gesturing passionately about his work. He looked alive, vibrant in a way he never seemed in her penthouse. Veronica's presence felt like an afterthought as he drifted between people, making easy conversation with women closer to his age, their laughter light and carefree. She felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it nearly took her breath away, an aching reminder that she was witnessing the one thing she feared most, her connection to him loosening. Afterward, she waited outside for him, hidden in the shadows as she watched him chat with a young woman who looked every bit as free and bold as Jake did. Veronica noticed the woman's hand brush his shoulder casually, a spark of flirtation flashing between them. She felt her composure cracking, her well-curated mask of confidence slipping to reveal the desperate, clinging fear beneath. When Jake finally noticed her, he seemed taken aback, like a deer caught in headlights, and that fleeting hesitation fueled her worst suspicions. He was slipping away. He was growing too comfortable in a world where she had no place. Back in her penthouse, Veronica replayed the evening in her mind, dissecting every glance, every laugh, every flicker of Jake's attention that had drifted away from her. She told herself she wasn't being unreasonable. She had invested so much in him, had opened doors he'd never have reached alone. Her resources, her influence, her love, these were things she believed should command loyalty. But loyalty wasn't what she was getting. Instead, she felt betrayed, abandoned, like a prized possession that was suddenly no longer enough. Her mind began to wander, and she found herself contemplating the idea of permanence. She was growing older in a world that prized youth and beauty, and she'd convinced herself that Jake was the answer, a way to stave off the inevitable. But if he left, what would that mean for her? She'd return to a world of power and success, yes, but it would be an empty victory without him by her side. A new sense of purpose filled her, dark and possessive. She would not let him slip away. She would find a way to keep him bound to her, even if it meant going to extremes. In the days that followed, Veronica's behavior became more erratic, her emotions teetering between frantic affection and cold calculation. She began to watch him more closely, monitoring his whereabouts and conversations, always searching for signs of betrayal. She was the silent observer, lurking on the edges of his life, watching him at his art shows, following him from a distance, sometimes even showing up unexpectedly just to remind him that she was always there, always watching. Jake, sensing her intensity, grew increasingly uneasy, which only fed her suspicions further. She saw every moment of hesitation, every excuse he gave, as confirmation that he was distancing himself. She started to imagine scenarios, creating stories in her mind about women he might be seeing, people whispering in his ear, urging him to break free of her grasp. Each imagined betrayal stoked her fury, her sense of abandonment turning into something far darker. Her desperation led her to contemplate ways to ensure that Jake would stay. She knew she could wield her wealth and connections to stifle his independence, weaving a life so enmeshed with hers that he'd find it nearly impossible to break free. But even that wasn't enough. Her need had morphed into something far more primal. If Jake were to remain hers, it would have to be entirely on her terms. There would be no space for his desires, his dreams, his friendships. She would envelop him completely, extinguishing the very independence that had first attracted her to him. A dark plan began to unfurl in her mind, a way to make him hers forever. It was just a flicker of a thought at first, a whisper in the shadowed corners of her mind. She knew how to charm, to manipulate, to pull strings unseen by others. With Jake, she would take every measure, bend every rule, to keep him by her side, no matter the cost. She couldn't let him go, and if that meant crossing a line, stepping into an abyss of her own making, she was prepared. In her world, once she set her sights on something, she never let go. As her obsession deepened, Veronica's plan took on form and substance, chillingly intricate and calculated. She knew Jake had been pouring himself into a new series for his upcoming showcase, a collection he believed could be his breakthrough. She had seen glimpses of his work, watched as he lost himself in creation, eyes alight with the thrill of building something purely his own. His excitement for the event, the way he spoke with pride and defiance, filled her with unease. This show represented freedom to him, a step toward his independence, a path away from her influence. And that was something she couldn't allow. The solution, she decided, was simple yet untraceable, an act that would keep him close while appearing to be a tragic accident. Veronica's first move was to persuade him to display his work in her penthouse, a suggestion he initially resisted, wanting a raw, authentic venue. But her persistence wore him down, and her promises of influential attendees and exclusive exposure eventually swayed him. She framed it as a celebration of his talent, an opportunity only she could provide, subtly binding him back under her control. The night of the event arrived, and Veronica orchestrated every detail with ruthless precision. Only a select handful of guests filled her opulent penthouse. Wealthy collectors and influential figures she knew would be captivated by Jake's work. She floated among them, radiating the elegance of a consummate hostess, every smile and laugh carefully crafted to disguise the intense, nervous energy simmering beneath. Her plan demanded flawless execution. Jake arrived later than expected, carrying his finished pieces wrapped in canvas, his face a blend of exhaustion and pride. Veronica's breath caught as she watched him arrange his work, feeling the raw passion he'd poured into each brushstroke radiate off the walls. The beauty of his art, haunting and powerful, stabbed at her with a pang of jealousy, a reminder of the part of him she could never truly control. That thought fueled her resolve. Moving with practiced grace, she poured drinks for her guests, keeping one special glass aside for Jake. The toxin she had chosen was obscure and rare, a substance procured through a series of discreet, under-the-radar connections. Tasteless, odorless, and fast-acting, it was the perfect solution to her dilemma. Just one sip would set off a chain of symptoms easily mistaken for a natural, tragic accident. As the evening unfolded, she finally approached Jake, offering him the glass she'd prepared. Her pulse quickened as he took it, blissfully unaware of the danger in his hand. She watched him sip, her heart racing as her darkest fantasy drew close to reality. A fleeting pang of doubt tugged at her conscience, but it was too late. He had already swallowed, the poison's deadly course set in motion. Around them, laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, guests buzzing with excitement over Jake's potential breakthrough. He stood before his art, pride subtly softening his face as he glanced her way, a glint of gratitude in his eyes. For an instant, her resolve wavered. But then, she reminded herself of the control she needed. If he were to be lost, it would be on her terms, bound to her in life and in death. Then it began. Jake's hand trembled, his expression clouding as an intense tightness overcame him. His vision blurred and he staggered, reaching out in confusion and panic. The room stilled, the guests exchanging uneasy glances. Veronica slipped into the role of the concerned lover, rushing to his side, gasping in shock as his breaths grew labored and his strength drained away with each painful inhale. Chaos erupted. Some guests rushed to help, others froze in horror, and Veronica released his hand, her inner triumph blooming beneath her mask of grief. She had won. Jake was now hers eternally, captured as her tragic, beautiful muse. When paramedics arrived, she clung to him, tears streaming down her face, playing the part of the grieving lover to perfection. She held on to him until they pried her away, savoring every moment of her carefully orchestrated tragedy. In the days that followed, Veronica's calculated grief became her shield. Investigators pieced together the evening's events, but her flawless portrayal of a devastated partner solidified her alibi. To the public, she was the broken-hearted woman who'd simply wanted to celebrate her lover's art, only to be left in the aftermath of a cruel twist of fate. Yet, even as she maintained her flawless facade, a new fear crept into her thoughts. What if someone had noticed something amiss? What if a faint trace of her crime lay hidden in her grief-stricken performance? She buried these fears as deeply as possible, clinging to her story and relishing the thrill of what she believed to be the perfect crime, her heart pounding with the exhilaration and risk of her victory. And yet, as whispers began to rise, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to expose her truth. In the wake of Jake's death, Veronica faced a whirlwind of police interviews, condolence calls, and a profound loneliness she hadn't anticipated. With each passing day, her once gilded life felt more fragile, like glass on the edge of shattering. Though she played the part of the grieving partner flawlessly, her controlled exterior masked an undercurrent of anxiety. She had built a meticulous wall around her secret, but tiny fractures were beginning to spread, threatening to reveal the truth she'd buried. The art world mourned Jake's passing, and his work gained posthumous fame, sparking heightened interest in his mysterious, brief life. Journalists, critics, and even distant family members appeared, eager to recount his last days and moments. Veronica, as his closest connection, became an unwilling focal point, the media's lens casting an uncomfortable glare on her private world. She had anticipated some attention, but this level of scrutiny unnerved her. The world seemed intent on picking apart her relationship with Jake, examining every nuance of his life and death with a sharp, unforgiving eye. One evening, as she sifted through a stack of letters from Jake's admirers, a peculiar message caught her attention. It was a note, unsigned, folded into an ordinary white envelope, but the words were anything but ordinary. It hinted at things only someone close to the event would know, referencing details no one could have known unless they were there. The tone was quiet yet menacing, as if to say, "I see you. I know what you've done." Veronica's blood ran cold. She read the note over and over, as if she could make it disappear with each successive reading. As days turned into weeks, similar notes began arriving, each with an ominous, almost mocking undertone. They varied in length and detail, but the message was always clear. Someone was onto her. These letters became a relentless reminder that her secret wasn't as hidden as she had thought. In her desperation, she combed through her contacts, trying to think of anyone who might suspect her or know her hidden motives. Every familiar face became a potential threat. Every shadow held the possibility of exposure. Paranoia tightened its grip on her, chipping away at her carefully composed life. Friends noticed her anxious glances and nervous laughter. They commented on how she seemed changed, haunted even. As whispers of her odd behavior circulated, the circle of people she once relied on began to shrink. She withdrew further, hiding in the same penthouse where she had once planned her perfect crime. In those echoing rooms, her luxurious isolation became a prison of her own making. Night after night, she replayed the event, her mind turning over every detail, every step, wondering if she had overlooked something, missed some fatal flaw that her anonymous tormentor had uncovered. Sleep eluded her, replaced by a sense of foreboding that shadowed her every waking moment. The illusion of control slipping as the walls she had carefully built began to collapse around her. And for the first time, Veronica felt the weight of fear, a fear that this perfect crime would soon be her undoing. Her mind spun with possibilities, wondering if someone close to Jake had known all along. And then, among the notes and letters that had filled her days with dread, one message stood out. It was from Liam, Jake's best friend, requesting a meeting. The tone was civil, almost detached, yet something about it carried an unmistakable weight. Liam knew something, and Veronica had no choice but to confront him. They arranged to meet at an upscale Manhattan restaurant, one she and Jake had often visited. Veronica arrived early, her nerves raw as she reflected on the last few months, on Jake's complaints about her jealousy and possessiveness. She'd thought of those moments as just the passion of a complicated relationship, but now she wondered how much Liam knew about them and about her. Liam entered, his expression unreadable, and took his seat across from her. His eyes were sharp, probing, as though they could see through her carefully composed exterior. He began slowly, asking polite questions about her well-being and the business, his words laced with subtle undertones. Veronica's pulse quickened. She sensed these pleasantries were merely a prelude. Then, without warning, he shifted the conversation, speaking of Jake. He recounted how Jake had confided in him, how their late-night conversations had drifted from art and ambition to the strain Jake had felt in his relationship with her. Liam spoke of how Jake had become increasingly anxious, burdened by Veronica's possessive grip, describing her as someone who consumed his world until there was barely any room left for his own. Veronica felt her throat tighten. Every word Liam uttered seemed to strip away her defenses, exposing the truth she had worked so hard to bury. She glanced around as if the strangers in the restaurant could overhear this dangerous exchange, but they remained oblivious, their laughter and chatter continuing in blissful ignorance. Liam leaned forward, his voice steady, yet edged with accusation. He admitted he had suspicions about Jake's death, that it wasn't the tragedy everyone believed. He had seen how Veronica clung to Jake, her charm tinged with control, her affection bordering on obsession. Though he couldn't prove it, he hinted with a quiet, chilling confidence that he knew what she had done. Veronica's heart raced. Anger bubbled beneath her skin, and her voice, usually so measured, came out sharp as she tried to deflect his thinly veiled accusation. She reminded him how much she had cared for Jake, how devoted she had been, but Liam's calm gaze remained unmoved. He knew her words were just another performance, a hollow echo of the person she had once pretended to be. For a moment, they locked eyes, each waiting for the other to break the silence. Veronica felt cornered, trapped, as if Liam's quiet certainty had stripped her bare. As the tension escalated, the other diners began to notice the charged atmosphere, their laughter fading into whispers. They sensed the storm brewing, the clash of wills unfolding before them. Finally, the dam broke. Veronica's voice rose, a wild mix of desperation and fury. She accused Liam of twisting the narrative, of using Jake's death to drag her down with him. In her mind, this wasn't just about Jake anymore. It was a battle for her very survival. Liam stood firm, unyielding in the face of her outburst. In a moment of rage-fueled desperation, Veronica grabbed a knife from their table and lunged at him. The shock in his eyes was fleeting, replaced by instinct as he dodged to the side. The knife glinted under the restaurant lights, missing its mark but sending a ripple of panic through the room. Diners gasped, recoiling in horror as the scene unraveled. Veronica felt a surge of adrenaline as chaos unfolded around them. She had crossed a crucial line, and the weight of her choices loomed over her. The diners stood frozen in shock, some instinctively reaching for their phones to call for help. Liam's expression shifted from surprise to a steely determination. There was no fear in his eyes. Instead, they held an unsettling calm as if he had anticipated this very moment. "You think you can ruin me?" she spat, her voice low and fierce, each word laced with a fierce defiance. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect myself." The atmosphere in the restaurant grew tense, waitstaff hurriedly trying to restore order while patrons watched in alarm. Veronica's pulse quickened as she realized the depths to which she would go to defend her secrets. In that tumultuous moment, surrounded by onlookers, she felt a sense of losing control, not just over Liam, but over everything she held dear. The confrontation was far from finished. She faced the one person who could unravel everything, and the truth loomed heavy in the air. Veronica Steele was resolute. She refused to be a victim and was prepared to fight back. The piercing sound of sirens echoed outside, intensifying the chaos within the upscale restaurant. Veronica's heart raced, and she felt the consequences of her actions weighing heavily on her. Liam remained composed, his gaze unwavering and filled with a mixture of challenge and resolve. He had revealed sides of her she never wanted to confront, tearing down the facade she had carefully built. She couldn't afford to show weakness. The stakes were too high. As the sound of police sirens grew nearer, the gravity of her predicament became undeniable. The lively chatter of the restaurant faded into uneasy whispers. Veronica's breath quickened as she scanned the room for an escape, but there was nowhere to hide. She was ensnared in her own making. She felt the scrutinizing eyes of the diners upon her, exposing the reality of who she was. Suddenly, two uniformed officers burst through the doors, their presence commanding attention. Their eyes quickly zeroed in on Veronica, still poised with a knife in hand. She felt her heart drop as panic surged within her, an instinctual urge to flee, battling against the reality that there was no escape. The officers approached with caution, their hands hovering near their holsters. "Put down the weapon," one of them ordered, his voice steady and authoritative. With a trembling hand, Veronica released the knife, allowing it to clatter to the floor. The sound reverberated in the tense silence that followed, marking her symbolic surrender to the reality she had desperately tried to evade. As the officers advanced, a wave of feet crashed over her. The life she had meticulously crafted, filled with glamour and power, was disintegrating before her eyes. In that fleeting moment, she recognized that her obsession had not only consumed Jake, but had also devoured her in the process. As they cuffed her and led her away, camera flashes captured the downfall of a woman who had sought to possess love but ultimately lost everything. When the squad car door slammed shut behind her, Veronica's thoughts turned dark, pondering whether this was the end or merely the beginning of something far more sinister lurking in the shadows of her past. Veronica Steele's trial commenced at the New York County Supreme Court, drawing considerable media attention and public intrigue. She faced charges of second-degree murder and manslaughter in the death of Jake Holloway, her 24-year-old boyfriend, who had tragically collapsed at a private event. The prosecution built a compelling case, bolstered by forensic evidence, including toxicology reports confirming the presence of a rare poison in the champagne served to the guests that night. During the proceedings, the prosecution called several witnesses, including Liam Carter, Jake's best friend. Liam testified about Veronica's possessive behavior and the heated arguments he had overheard between the couple. The defense contended that there was no direct evidence linking Veronica to the administration of the poison, suggesting that Jake's death could have stemmed from an accidental overdose or a health complication. However, the jury found this argument unconvincing. Veronica took the stand in her defense, attempting to paint herself as a victim of circumstance. She claimed her relationship with Jake was genuine and insisted she had never intended to harm him. Yet, her demeanor during cross-examination raised doubts about her credibility. After 4 days of testimony and closing arguments, the jury returned with a shocking verdict: not guilty. The acquittal sent ripples through the media, framing Veronica as a woman wronged rather than a murderer. Freed from the shackles of justice, she stepped into the world with a renewed sense of hope, even as the shadows of her past loomed ominously. For 5 years, Veronica navigated life as a social pariah, her reputation marred despite the trial's outcome. Haunted by memories of Jake, she battled a guilt that morphed into a persistent specter. Failed relationships plagued her, each encounter steeped in reminders of what she had lost. As her once thriving luxury fashion brand faltered, it felt as if the universe conspired against her, a relentless reminder of the life she had taken. In the solitude of her penthouse, Veronica sank deeper into despair. Night after night, she was haunted by vivid dreams of Jake, his eyes filled with disappointment and betrayal. Despite seeking solace through therapy and spiritual practices, nothing eased the suffocating weight of her conscience. In fleeting moments of clarity, the harsh truth struck her. She could never escape the consequences of her actions. One fateful evening, Veronica stood before the mirror, confronting a reflection that resembled a ghost of the confident woman she once was. Guilt overwhelmed her. It was a poison that no amount of wealth or luxury could wash away. In a moment of desperation, she made a life-altering decision. She would confess to the police. With her heart racing, Veronica walked into the precinct. The officers looked up in surprise as she approached the desk. She confessed to the murder of Jake Holloway, recounting the events of that fateful night and the darkness that had consumed her since. Her confession sent shockwaves through the department, reopening a case that had long been buried. A media frenzy erupted anew, with headlines blaring about the socialite's dramatic change of heart. The courtroom was filled with spectators eager to witness the latest chapter in the saga of Veronica Steele. At her sentencing, the judge listened intently as Veronica spoke of her remorse. She acknowledged the pain she had caused and the burden of her actions. Despite her initial acquittal, the judge viewed her confession as an act of courage, but not a path to redemption. Veronica was sentenced to 18 years in prison, a punishment that would force her to confront the darkness she had tried so desperately to escape. As she was led away in handcuffs, an unexpected sense of relief washed over Veronica. The prison walls would confine her physically, but perhaps they would also provide the space to face her demons. In the years to come, she resolved to work on mending her fractured soul, seeking forgiveness not just from the world but from herself.